Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming all the participants and the lovers of English to the webinar number 88 on Ushering Shakuntala into the Modern World, organized by English Language Teachers Association of India. I welcome Professor Nandini Bhattacharya, Professor, Department of English and Culture Studies, the University of Burdwan, West Bengal, for having accepted our invitation to be the resource person for today's webinar. I wholeheartedly welcome the moderator of today's webinar, Professor Anindya Syam Choudhury, Professor and Head, Department of English, Assam University, Silchar, to moderate the session. Let's listen to a promo of ELTAI. Well, I'm Dr. Yash Shankarkumar, the host of today's webinar. It gives me immense pleasure in introducing the moderator of today's webinar, Professor Anindya Syam Choudhury, who is working as a professor in the Department of English, Assam University, Silchar, Assam. He has a PhD in English, a postgraduate certificate in the teaching of English, and a postgraduate diploma in the teaching of English from EFL University, Hyderabad. In addition, he has also a Trinity College London certificate in teaching of English to speakers of other languages. He has presented various papers in international conferences like Asia TEFL in Kuching, Malaysia, China, Philippines, Cambodia, Turkey, and Japan. He has also contributed articles to several reputed journals. His current areas of interest include world Englishes, the politics of English in post-colonial contexts, language literature, interface areas like stylistics, post-colonial literature in English, especially writings in English from India's Northeast. I wholeheartedly welcome the moderator of today's webinar, Professor Anindya Syam Choudhury. Sir, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Shankarkumar. A warm good evening to everyone present here today. I, on behalf of the Department of English, Assam University Silchar, and ELTAI Southern Assam chapter, welcome you all to this webinar. Today's talk, ladies and gentlemen, will be delivered by Professor Nandini Bhattacharya, and the title of the talk is Ushering Shakuntala into the Modern World. Professor Nandini Bhattacharya is a professor in the Department of English and Culture Studies, the University of Burdwan, West Bengal. She is the project director of the UGC SAP DRS project entitled Ethics of Border Crossing, the Department of English and Culture Studies, the University of Burdwan, and is also a visiting professor of National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. She is a recipient of UGC National Research Fellowship Award and Research Project Award of Makayas, Kolkata. In addition, she is collaborating with the Department of History, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, on a project on accessions and plebiscites as part of her studies on subcontinental partitions. Among her important publications are books on R.K. Narayan's The Guide, Mulkraj Anand's Untouchable, and Tagore's Gora. Her book, Strange Familiarities, Exploring Subcontinental Epistolary Cultures, is being published by Orient Blackswan. She is currently working on Scottish ideological influences on Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's educational experiments. So, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Nandini Bhattacharya will be speaking for around 45 minutes from now, after which we will have a Q&A session. So I hand over the floor to Professor Nandini Bhattacharya. Ma'am, please.
Thank you. I hope I am audible and visible.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Right. So I want to thank the organizers, and this seems to be a pretty big deal. I mean, I hadn't expected such a organized and such a organization with a history, with a tradition. So I'm very glad to be part of this entire endeavor, which has spanned over 50 years and which has a global presence. So I thank Anindo for having ushered me into this group of English teachers, which we all are, and therefore giving me this opportunity. So, and I also thank all of you all who have come on a Sunday afternoon to hear an old woman speak. So thank you for being there. Now, I'd like to speak on bridges. See, very strangely speaking, I'd like to speak on bridges and on connections. And I'd like to speak about an actual bridge, which is was at least called the Periyar Bridge, which connects the island part of Anasalai to the part of Anasalai where the office of Hindu now stands. Now, originally, this was a bridge which was called the Bridge of Fort St. George because it connected the two parts of Chennai by that bridge. Now, it is a bridge that Monier Williams is talking about because this bridge was considered to be an architectural marvel. It was considered to be some sort of a new thing that was being done. And this is what he says in his preface to Shakuntala, or the Lost Ring. Remember that the first translation of Shakuntala was by William Jones, and this was called Shakuntala, or the Fatal Ring. And you are well aware that in Sanskrit, the word Abhigyana Shakuntala or Abhigyana Shakuntala means a ring of recognition. All right, Abhigyan is something very similar to, say, anagnorisis, recognition. And it cannot be too often repeated that our duty, I'm reading from the introduction to Monier Williams's translation of Shakuntala. It cannot be too often repeated that our duty towards our great dependency requires us to do something more than merely rule justly. We may impart high education, we may make good laws, we may administer impartial justice, we may make roads, lay down railroads, telegraphs, simulate trade, and accomplish amazing engineering feats like that lately achieved at Perrier, increase the wealth and develop the resources of our vast eastern territories. But unless we seek to understand the inhabitants, unless we think it worthwhile to study their ancient literature, their religious ideas and time-honored institutions, unless we find in them something to admire and respect, we can never expect any reciprocity of esteem and respect on their part. We can never look forward to a time when the present partition wall, which obstructs the free exchange of social relations between the European and Asiatic races, will be entirely removed. This is 1898, though this book was written much earlier. This is the 8th edition, and the first edition of the first translation of Shakuntala in English. This was published in 1781. And this one, the Shakuntala or the Lost Ring, an Indian drama, this was published originally in 1855. So very interesting, the time 1855 and the idea of the bridge. All right, the Perrier Bridge, which I have crossed many times because my mashi or my aunt lived in Madras, as it was called then. And I had never imagined that I would find a reference to that, nor had I imagined that I would find a reference to a group of people in Trivandrum who were enacting Shakuntala. All right, to whom also Monier Williams refers. And the interesting part is that Shakuntala has now become, in 1889, it has now become, in fact, in 1886, it has become one of the 100 best books of the world, most read books of the world. And this book list was prepared by Sir John Lubbock. Now, this is the beginning. If people are interested in book history, then one of the things that book history traces is the who makes book lists, who tells you what to read, who tells you this is a classic or that is not, who canonizes books. So this process was begun in 1886 at the behest of Sir John Lubbock, and he placed Monier Williams's translation at 35. All right, Bible was at the first. I think Quran was at the 10th. So this is interesting. Now you have so many. I mean, the list for Booker, the list for Pulitzer, the list for Nobel Awards. But this is the beginning of 10 best books of the year, 100 best books of the year. Anyway, so he is talking about a time when Shakuntala is becoming more and more well known to the European world, to the Western world. And 1854 to 1855 is the peak period of Shakuntala being published, being written, being translated in Sanskrit and in English, side by side. The one interesting translation, I mean, Monier Williams and William Jones, who published, I mean, who translated the play in 1786, and Monier Williams, who did this task in 1855, both of them translated the text in the sense of annotating, glossing, and introducing the text in Sanskrit, and then going on to translate it in English. So not, any kind of translation, tremendous academic rigor that is involved in this translation. Now, why? Because they also do a simultaneous Sanskrit annotation and purification. Now, see, the point that I'm trying to make is that Shakuntala can be a kind of a bridge between the Indic cultures and English which comes to India. I mean, the English that comes to India requires a medium, a vehicle, a vector to permeate itself. And that vector cannot simply be teaching a few words to people, a hat, mat, cat, and things like that. But but also to transfer a culture. So there has to be a reciprocity. There has to be a dialogue between the Western countries, between the colonizers and the Indian subcontinent, and there has to be a choice of a text that will represent India. So the translation and the popularization, so it's now called among the 100 best books of the world, and it comes pretty high at 35. So not 99. So it's fairly popular. So this is a event that I would like you to focus upon. Why is Shakuntala chosen? Why is it so important? Why is it a bridge between cultures? Why is it a sort of multiple bridge? Why is it a nodal point through which cultural light passes? And as cultural light passes, there is an illumination, there is an epiphany, and it irradiates the world which we call the modern age. The modern age, in the sense, now what do we mean by modern? A girl is wearing a tank top and jeans and we say, oh, she's so modern. Now I mean modern in the sense of epistemology, in the sense of knowledge. Modern, usually modernity, at least in Western episteme, talks of it beginning from the late 17th, early 18th century, that is from the beginning of Enlightenment. This is also the beginning of Romantic studies and Romanticism. And what I insist is a kind of global, transnational Romanticism. Now, as teachers of English, we have been taught generally to think of Romanticism as Wordsworth and Coleridge, and maybe Blake and Byron thrown in for a good measure, a little bit of Keats. But that is not all to Romanticism. Romanticism is the beginning of what today we would call cosmopolitan literature, what we would call transnational literature, what we would, call comparative literature, what we would call world literature. So this is the beginning when many cultures are being looked at, and there is a feeling that yes, these cultures must be taught, these cultures must be learned, and that there can be something like a Welter literature or a world literature. Now, the word world literature in German is first pronounced by Goethe, and it is taken up by Rabindranath Tagore in an essay which he calls Vishwa Sahitya, where again he mentions Shakuntala. Now, I will just, go over this little bit which I thought people from Chennai would be interested in, that there is this V. Padmanabha Iyer, who is BA, not a joke, in May 1893, resident of Karamanai, Trivandrum, Travancore, and this is a 7-coil street in Trivandrum. You will tell me whether it still exists. The members of the Karamanai Young Men's Mutual Improvement Society acted your translation of Shakuntala on the 3rd and the 5th of September last year in the Government Museum Theatre, Trivandrum. It was acted in 2 parts, so on and so forth. All our chief native officials and many Europeans and their ladies honored the occasion with your presence, with their presence. We acted it a second time at the special request of the second Prince of Travancore in his palace, and the mother, Highness's mother, the junior Rani. The public were kind enough to pronounce it a success. In many cases, applause was given not so much for the acting as for the beauty of the translation. The Hindus have a great liking for this play, and not one of the enlightened Hindu community will fail to acknowledge your translation is a perfect one. This is a letter that is being written to Monier Williams. And our object of acting Hindu plays is to bring home to the Hindus the good lessons that our ancient authors are able to teach us. If there is one lesson in these days more than another, which familiarity with fountains of Western literature constantly forces upon the mind, it is that our age is turning its back on time-honored creeds and dogmas. We are hurrying forward to a chaos in which all our existing beliefs and axioms of morality may be in the end submerged. All right. So, and there's a tendency to reject everything that is old. See, that we are all, I mean, we are still speaking in the same way. So I desire no future that will break ties with the past, is what George Eliot had said. And so it is highly necessary that Hindus should know something of their former greatness. The songs of Shakuntala in the prologue and another in the beginning of 5th act very easily adapt themselves to Hindu tunes. So the interesting thing is that by 1889, this play is being projected as a sort of a play that is not only something through which the English language and English culture and Western ideas have been have met, but it is also a play which upholds the Hindu tradition and civilization and foundational values. Now, I will go back to this, how this happens. But before that, I would just like to say that, there is, how does Shakuntala become so popular in Europe? Now, one of the things that you've got to keep in mind is, of course, Orientalism. That is not the Orientalism of Edward Said, but Orientalism as in a love of the Orient, a genuine love, a sort of a feeling that the Orient contains some truths which are not there or available for the rational mechanized West. Now, George Foster in 1791 translates into German Shakuntala, and this arouses a wave of excitement. This is another very, very important translation. Now, George Foster's translation is actually a German retranslation of Jones's English translation. All right. So Jones, remember, had translated it both in Sanskrit. I mean, when I say he had translated it in Sanskrit, you might just get up and say, oh, it was already in Sanskrit. But he made it more accessible. He annotated it, he glossed it, he looked up various versions, and then he fixed a kind of text, which would be a good text. And so Foster, what he does is, once this is published, there is Johann Gottfried Herder, about whom all of us must have heard, because he's also the forefather, the founding father of Romanticism, dedicated 2 epistolary essays about Indisches drama, all right, 1792. And he also introduces the 2nd edition of Foster's German translation of Shakuntala. So what does Herder say? You see, more or less later on, what Rabindranath says in his essay on Shakuntala in Prachin Sahitya is basically what Herder is saying. And also, Rabindranath is also taking into account what Herder is saying and what Goethe is saying. Now, this is what Goethe is saying in that essay of Herder. In the beginning, as an epigraph, there is a German, there are 4 lines of a German poem, which Rabindranath translates into English. Wouldst thou the young year's blossoms and the fruits of its decline, and all by which the soul is charmed, enraptured, feasted, fed, wouldst thou the earth and heavens itself in one sole name combine, I name thee, O Shakuntala, at once all is said. This is the epigraph to Herder's essay. So I'm trying to tell you how Shakuntala as a play becomes very, very well known in Europe. Not only in England, of course. In England, of course, England was tied to India because of the colonial encounter. But to become so popular with the French, with the Germans, with the Russians, there were 2 operas in 54. They were Polish and Russian. That is because Russia was connected to France via language and literature. So this is what Herder says, see, Herder says that Shakuntala must be read because it is, what Romanticism stands for. Now, let me just tell you that on 4th of March, UN has kept that day for women empowerment in preservation of nature, in preservation of environment. Maybe I could dedicate this lecture to Shakuntala and tell the UN Walas that, look, I mean, maybe you could have dedicated 4th of March, it's 6th of March, 6th of March to, it is the Women's Day. You could have dedicated it to Shakuntala. All right. See, because throughout Western history, Shakuntala is being feted and valorized because she is she's close to nature. She represents nature. She represents the innocence and naivete of human nature. She is the woman in nature, innocent, unknowing. She's someone that Dushyanta can, seduce just like that, because she has no interaction with the world or with the men or with their wiles. Now, so this is what Herder says, that one has to think about connections, bridges, all right? One has to think about intercultural communication. Today, we would call this in a more fashionable way, cosmopolitanism, planetarism, all right? But in the 18th century, the word that he is using is intercultural communication. And Goethe is using the word world literatures. All right, so Shakuntala becomes that nodal point. In Bengali, we call this a more. There were many roads meet, we call it a more. So I believe those who are Punjabis also use this, ek more raya, and so on and so forth. So this conjunction, this that node. This is what Herder is calling Shakuntala. So intercultural communication, harmony between humans and natures, a striving for perfection. He's using repeatedly the word Bildung. Bildung, of course, means education, but Bildung also means a striving for perfection that is already within the human being. So it's a graded development. And he also speaks about the precarity of such intercultural communication. All right, because there are uneven power relations. Obviously, because Europe is more powerful, Europe is undergoing a industrial revolution. Europe is, Kant has already written about human reason. So Europe is more advanced, whereas the Indic civilization seems to be more backward. Therefore, when you're talking of nature and of the natural, it could be interpreted in a negative way, in a pejorative way. That is what Romila Thapar actually does in her book on Shakuntala, which is open access, so you could have a look at it. Now, this whole business of Shakuntala being at the nodal point where the power relations are asymmetrical, that is what Herder is explaining. Herder is saying that, look, I mean, as Germans, we don't have any political connection or any economic profit to make from India. That happens with the English, with the British. Therefore, it is only to be expected that someone like Monier Williams is going to translate Shakuntala, because it is meant to be a text for the civil servants who have come to rule India. But this is not so important for the Germans. And in fact, it says that the Germans have an eclectic imagination, and they look for what is brilliant and beautiful in the world, and that this is the moment when the world must wake up to the many kinds of cultures, the many kinds of literatures that are all speaking to one another. You see, and it is by such a recognition that not only is the comparative literature as a discipline is born, also comparative philosophy, comparative linguistics, all these are born at the moment of enlightenment, which is also the moment of romanticism, because there are these bridges and connections. And these bridges and connections can only happen if you go back and see what are the cultures whose voices are not heard. Let me, because I'm talking about romanticism, talk about one text which maybe you've heard about, and this is the Ossian group of texts, which was supposed to be an old Scottish romance. And in fact, the Game of Thrones is based on that. So this is, and the hero is Finnegal. Finnegal literally means a white man. And there was a man called James Macpherson, whose brother, John Macpherson, was one of the governor generals, very short term, but one of the governor generals in the East India Company. So James Macpherson's Ossian became such a hit that it was thought to be the beginning of what Herder called folk. Now, this is the German pronunciation, but it would be written as VOLK. So when we are talking of romanticism as a return to nature, as a return to the strange, as, about La Belle Dame sans merci, we ought to take into account this position of Shakuntala as that nodal point through which these ideas about romanticism are percolated, are they are thrown across. Now, so also this whole idea, very romantic idea of striving for perfection and a kind of idealism, because Shakuntala, though she makes love to Dushyanta in the Karna's ashram, Karna being her, father who has adopted her, it is only in the ashram of Marichi in the heavens where her love is going to be consummated. So there is a kind of loss and longing and nostalgia and a rememoration. Just look at the word abhigyana, all right, to remember, to recognize. So I believe that the IIT Chennai is doing a project on memory studies. Now, Shakuntala is a the perfect text for memory studies, because it's about remembering, it's about forgetting, it's about looking back. It's about the king drawing a picture, a replica of Shakuntala, and his signet ring being given, that being gobbled up by a fish, and then that comes back, and then he remembers. And why doesn't he remember in the beginning? That's an interesting point. All right. So Herder's book, if you are interested, it actually is Zerust Blatter, which means fallen leaves. All right. So interesting, isn't it? Fallen leaves, in which he has this essay on Shakuntala. Now the other thing that I would like to say is that by 1855, in 1854, there is Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who has already, Shakuntala has been in the court of Farrukhshire. It has been redone from Sanskrit into Braj ki Boli. And a few Persianizations of the text have become more prevalent. Now, when Vidyasagar is working for this text, remember, he is also, like Monier Williams, teaching for a college of the company. He's being the Fort William College, even though it was on its last legs, and Monier Williams was teaching in Hailbury in Hertfordshire, and that was actually called the East India Company College. So both of them are more or less doing the same thing. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar is doing it 1 year earlier. That first he's annotating and purifying a Shakuntala text, which is in Sanskrit. Remember that Vidyasagar got a Vidyasagar, which is like a professoriate, because he was a Sanskrit Pandit from the Sanskrit College in Kolkata. And secondly, Vidyasagar remodels this into a Bengali Upakkam. All right. Now that means a tale, a prose tale. Now let me just tell you, I mean, I'm sure you know this, but that in the Mahabharata and in the Adi Parvan of the Mahabharata, the episode of Shakuntala is called Shakuntala Upakkhan. Now, Upakkhan in Mahabharata literally means a story. So within the epic, there is the story of Shakuntala, because she's the mother of the Pauravas, the line of Purus, the King Puru. And Bharata, her son, is one among the long lineage whose story is being told. So this is a story that is being told to Vaishampayan. And I'm sorry, it is Vaishampayan who's telling this story. And he is talking about a Dushyant who is a horrible man, generally. And Shakuntala is also pretty blasé. I mean, when they meet, they recognize their sexual attraction immediately. But the king is more lustful. Shakuntala is still a little bit of an innocent maiden, but the Shakuntala understands that there has to be a transaction. So she says that if a son is born, then he will be king. And that is what the king promises. And then they lie together, then they make love. And then the king simply forgets her, there is no ring, there is no curse of Durvasha. So when Shakuntala is pregnant, when she has had the child and the child is a little bigger, they go to the court, but the king treats them very badly. The king calls her a whore and tells her that she's trying to push somebody else's son onto his lap. In fact, there is a Jataka tale where there is a king and a girl who fall in love, and of course a son is born, and the king had said that he had given a ring and had said that this is after the Mahabharata, of course. This is possible source of Kalidasa's Natak. There he says that, I'm not going to accept this. This is not my son. She comes to the court. I'm talking about this Jataka tale. And when he tells that, then the the girl simply throws up the boy and asks anybody who considers himself to be the father to catch the child. Of course, if the child falls, he will die. So the father extends his hand, and thus the paternity test is done. Now, let me go back to Mahabharata. In Mahabharata, ultimately, there is a Daiva voice, a sort of voice from the heavens that says that accept this. This is your son and this is your wife, and so on and so forth. But the king remains, quite horrible. I mean, he has rather nasty things to say even in the end. Now, this episode of Shakuntala, where there is a paternity problem and a paternity test, which is proved only by the intervention of the gods, is transferred to possibly, Kalidasa was in the court of some of the Gupta kings, maybe Samudragupta or somebody after him. And there, this becomes a tale where the king is entirely absorbed of blame. There comes that ring of recognition. So because Shakuntala has lost the ring, the king cannot be blamed. The king doesn't know. The king has forgotten. So, and also the curse. The curse is very interesting. Remember, Durvasha is someone who had also come to Kunti in Mahabharata and also wanted to curse her because she was denying him hospitality. But then Kunti reformed herself and did the hospitality, gave him Argho and Paddo. And then Durvasha actually gave her the boon of having any child out of any of the 5 gods. Now, the interesting speculation is that what sort of hospitality did Durvasha actually ask for? I mean, what was that hospitality? Was it something like the hospitality that Dushyant had asked for? I mean, which rishi would actually ask for hospitality and then in return give you the gift of having children by various men? So interesting that Shakuntala was thinking very hard about, so Kalidasa might have remembered that story in Mahabharata. And so from an epic Upakkam, that is a narrative, albeit in verse, now it becomes a 7-act drama. It becomes a Nataka in which Shakuntala and Dushyant are blighted by 2 curses. One, two Durdoibos, all right? One being the signet ring, and the other being the curse of Durvasha. So with this, just like Oedipus, I mean, somebody who is cursed, and so nothing can be done. So anyway, so this absolves Dushyant when Shakuntala comes to his court, and then of course there is the final reunion in the Marichi's ashram, where she is now an older and wiser woman, and of course she has the child, the son, which is the great source of desire. It's the son that Dushyanta wants. So obviously this is a play that is deeply patriarchal, deeply implicated in class values, aristocratic values, very problematic so far as women's position is concerned. I mean, if you compare this to the original story, Shakuntala was a fiery woman. I mean, and she really gave it back to Dushyant when he rejected her. But in this play, she is lajja abonato. She's always, she's ashamed. She's abashed. And even at the end, she calls him Aryaputra. And I have seen a movie by V. Shantaram, where also, again, this is a post-Nehruvian Shakuntala. It's called Shakuntala, where the girl is very feisty, very, on your face, and tells Dushyant like it is. But Kalidasa's play is, of course, pro-Raja, pro-king. So after this, of course, we come to this other period when Shakuntala is now accepted as a Hindu Nari, as a woman who has Hindu virtues. So Vidyasagar, then there is Madhusudan Datta, the one who wrote Meghnad Bodh Kabbya. Then there is, of course, Bankim Chandra, Chandranath Bosu, all of them, and Rabindranath Tagore, all of them try to prove that this is a fall. All right, what Shakuntala had done, even though she's a child of nature, even though she's a romantic heroine, she has committed a folly, pap. I mean, actually, this is a word that is used again and again. And because she has committed this pap of sleeping with a man before marriage, therefore she must suffer. That is why she's a good Hindu wife. In fact, if you read Chandranath Bosu, who is less read, I mean, most of you have read Rabindranath, but Chandranath Bosu is less translated. So maybe you don't read him. And also Vidyasagar sort of makes her into a very, sort of a helpless woman, a damsel in distress. So this is the change that is coming into that ideal Hindu Nari who is abashed, who has committed a sin, and then later she must undergo the expiation of viraha, of suffering, and finally get her husband. Now, I don't know how much time I have, but there is, how much of time do I have?
Madam, a few more minutes.
A
Maybe.
few more
No
minutes.
issues.
So
No
maybe,
issues.
maybe my last example. So the points that I have made are that Shakuntala is a seminal text, because it ushers in what is known as Enlightenment modernity. Because Enlightenment modernity is not simply about reason. It is also about a strong nostalgia for the past. It is also about a feeling for what is natural, what is innocent, naive, what is untouched. So that is something that Shakuntala is able to provide. Now, the second thing that I have said is that it forms the basis of what we today call comparative literature or world literature studies or cosmopolitan literature studies or transnational literature studies. All right. So it is a play that represents all the connections that we have, we could examine between Sanskrit and old Sanskrit and new Sanskrit, between the English understanding or European understanding of Sanskrit as Indology and the Sanskrit of the Pandits of India, as between Sanskrit and the vernaculars, the bhashas. It was translated in Hindi, in Bangla, in practically every other language. Now, since I don't know all of these languages, therefore I translated in Urdu. All right. So that is something that has to be kept in mind. And also, it is a play that is now novelized in the hands of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Chandranath Bosu, Bankim Chandra, and Rabindranath, it is treated like a novel. The characters are treated like characters in novels, as if they have their own, place. I mean, if you read T.S. Eliot, you will see this is one romantic strategy that he is fighting against. He's saying that a play is a play, it's a performance, and a character in a play is embedded within a complex plot action that Aristotle calls, and therefore you can't sort of pluck out a Hamlet or a Macbeth and talk about the inner psychological beings of Macbeth or Hamlet or Lear, as Bradley had done. So this marks a very important move away from a romantic way of reading a Shakespeare or any play. So in 1854, in the hands of Vidyasagar, this play is being novelized, and it is being treated like a novel by almost all the Bengali intellectuals who are engaging with the play. Nevertheless, even when they, as Vidyasagar does, in the Sanskrit version, he writes a nataka. But in the Bengali version, it is simply a upannas or a novel. All right, in 7 chapters. So this is the interesting refraction that you have to, it is the age of novels. So the last thing that I would like to say is that Shakuntala has had a very good reception so far as popular culture is concerned. I'm not just talking about Ravi Verma and the various Persian miniatures on Shakuntala. You will find those pictures in Monier Williams' book, because Monier Williams didn't know that these Persianized pictures wouldn't fit what he called a Hindu text. Nevertheless, many pictures of Shakuntala, many redoings of Shakuntala. Interestingly, in Amar Chitra Katha, there is what is shown as Shakuntala is mostly Ravi Verma's kind of paintings of Shakuntala. Now, the final place would be Hindi movies, all right? So in Hindi movies, there is V. Shantaram's Shakuntala, which was a big hit. This was a post-Nehruvian Shakuntala, and she's still a feisty woman. She's a new woman. And of course, there have been some caricatures, comic renditions of Shakuntala in modern Bombay. So that again is funny, but it keeps the basic story. But the person, I think, who has sort of, had a field day with Shakuntala would be Shakti Samant in his very well-known Aradhana. Aradhana is the Shakuntala story that is perfectly redone, because it is about that girl's Aradhana, her tapasya. It is this word tapas and tapasya that is used in Vidyasagar, in Madhusudan, in Rabindranath, that she must do tapasya for her pap. So this Aradhana, that Safal Hogi Teri Aradhana, if you go back to that very well-known movie by Rajesh Khanna and Sharmila Thakur, you will, I'm sure, remember what I'm trying to say. And of course, many of Raj Kapoor's movies, maybe something like, I don't remember this, this was with his Ram Teri Ganga Maili, which is again a Shakuntala redoing, the man forgetting, then Mausam, the man forgetting the girl getting pregnant, and then a long suffering and something. So, one of the reasons I've often asked one of my students, why do you enjoy Aradhana? The reason you enjoy Aradhana is, of course, it's a well-told story with lots of, that moment of kama, roop, tera, mastana, and so on and so forth. But it is because we have within our heads certain clues, So myths and stories, mythical stories, are not frozen in time. They are transformed continuously, so that, when you see a new thing, you don't realize that the plot or the action is actually something that has been done anew. That is why it's so pleasurable. So things that are absolutely new are not so pleasurable as a story that you know and you do not know, that you have forgotten. So your abhigyana, your ring that you see the movie Aradhana, and then you say, oh, yes, I mean, I liked it. So thank you.
Madam, that was very, very interesting. I mean, you raised so many issues, so many questions. We barely have time to take the questions. Very interesting, some very interesting questions that we have received. So I would like to start with a set of two very simple questions from Dr. Vinod K. Chopra.
All right.
So he has asked you, why did the European translate Shakuntala? That's a very basic question. And was it because they wanted to cherish the Indian values, or they wanted to attack those values? Very simple.
All right. So they translated it simply because because William Jones wanted one text which could be taught to the civil servants, and he was told by a Brahmin that the most representative text would be Abhigyan Shakuntala. It is the popularity of the play in India that made the British translate it. If that answers your question. No, it wasn't because it was trashed. Yes, it was trashed by people like Mill and Grant and Kipling, because they thought that it was all rubbish. And of course, there was this erotica, Shakuntala's breasts and her, how somebody, Dushyant, is actually looking from the background at them, and the love fever. All those were sanitized, but nevertheless, they recognized that this was popular and a good play, and therefore they translated it for their civil servants.
Okay, Madam, could you highlight this particular aspect, leaving out of several passages by Jones, for instance, because they were erotic in nature and so on and so forth. So could you highlight?
More than Jones, I would say in 1854, there is Vidyasagar, who is making her into a Kurum figure. Do you understand the meaning of the word Kurum? Pitiful. Yes. All right, a pitiful young girl who deserves our mercy. All right, so she's a bundle of tears. In fact, Bankim Chandra had called this the perfect panacea for a lot of tears. All right, he was making fun of. Everybody used to cry. I mean, I cried when my mother read it out. How Dukhini Shakuntala. So the erotic part is Biedermeierized. I'm using again a German term, which you would be familiar with. To Biedermeier is to make middle class. For example, the Rapunzel story, all right, which is a German story, Rapunzel fairy tale. In the original Oldenburg story, Rapunzel had got pregnant with that prince, and the prince used to come up through her hair. So when the mother, that witch, comes and she says that, how are you so big now? I'm sorry. She says that, Mother Gretel, my clothes are very tight because I'm pregnant. Now, obviously, the brothers Grimm could not bring this to the children. So she simply says that my clothes are now tight. All right. So you see, these are the little things in original tales which, when brought to 19th century children, are Biedermeierized. It is a Biedermeiering effect, making it sanitized.
Very interesting, madam. There is a question from Kingshuk Chakraborty, who is a PhD scholar in our department, Department of English, Assam University. And he asks you this question: can we interpret the popularity of Shakuntala in Europe? Can we interpret that this popularity stems from the Orientalists' recognition of the similarities between ancient Indian cultural values with that of ancient European cultures, like that of Greece, devoid of enlightenment, morality, and much more?
I think it was Monier Williams who called him the Shakespeare of India. Later on, I remember there was a huge row between two Jadavpur teachers, very well known, and my teachers, I'm not going to name them. There was a chapter of this kind of a project, like English teachers, English literature teachers. And one of the Punjabi professors had said, let's keep it as Shakespeare Kalidas, Sanstha or something like that. And these teachers said, oh, there's nothing, Shakespeare's got nothing to do with Kalidas. Kalidas had been there so long ago, and they're so different, and so on and so forth. So the project fell through. And or maybe the Punjabis did it and the Bengalis with their great intellect, they withdrew. But interestingly, it is Monier Williams who actually says, and also Herder, who says that there are a lot of similarities between Shakespeare and Kalidas. So not such a bad title, I would say. The Bengalis are very snobbish most of the time, so which is why they are in the position that they are.
Yeah, Madam, we barely have any time to take more questions. Just a last one, a very simple one again from Mohan Sundaram, who has asked this question. What is the message that Shakuntalam reveals to the youth of today?
I think that one of the messages that is given is the one that Herder and Goethe had recognized, is the message that the UN is talking about, that the woman and nature can come together for in this day of environmental crisis. A woman is closer to nature because she bears children. And therefore, even though at the risk of exoticizing, at the risk of making, inane comments, I would say that that is the connection. And I would also say that Shakuntala brings home the idea of romantic love, something that was fairly unknown. I haven't even talked about that. It was fairly unknown. One of the reasons for its popularity was bringing the idea of romantic love. So today, when you say, see kuch kuch hota hai, you should remember Shakuntala, all right? Because the whole idea of a boy and a girl falling in love and then getting married, this was unknown in India. It was unknown everywhere in the world. You never fell in love with your wife. You fell in love with other people, other people's wives maybe. But your wife was not somebody whom you loved, all right? I mean, when Shakespeare is saying, shall I compare thee to the summer's day? He's talking about his love for a man, or for a dark lady. He's not talking about, he only left his second or third best bed for his wife. Nobody loves wives. So now today, if we love our wives, I think we have to give Shakuntala some credit.
Okay, Madam, last question from my side. You referred to the German Romanticism, the pioneers of German Romanticism,
Right.
von Herder, von Hardenberg, and such other people who possibly regarded Shakuntala as an icon of German Romanticism.
Yeah.
Why
of world romanticism.
Yeah.
Of world
So
romanticism.
why were the English romantics not very fascinated by Shakuntala, if I may put it that way? This is also a question raised by Thapar in one of the chapters.
One of the reasons was, of course, that the English in India, education of Indians was at the behest of Scotsmen who were Presbyterians and who disliked this kind of eroticism and all this romantic love. So Mill had some very nasty things to say about Shakuntala. He had very nasty things. Macaulay also had very nasty things. Kipling had very nasty things. So in the Indian education system, in Shakuntala didn't go a very long way. It was considered to be, but it came to be received in very peculiar ways, for example, in Kopal Kundala of Bankim Chandra. So there was reception, but it was of a curious and a refracted kind.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We have several other questions, which what I will do is I will mail those questions to you.
Yeah. I think that will be better.
So thank you so much for your wonderful talk.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, madam.
Yes.
I hand over the floor to Dr. Shankarkumar now. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Professor Nandini. topic, Ushering Shakuntala, modern world. And, I, on behalf of ELTAI, formally thank Professor for having accepted the and thank Professor Anindya for having more. Thank you so much.
I think you are breaking. I think you are breaking. Yeah.
Uh, I do invite the participants for next week's webinar on approaching spoken English. Approaching Spoken English, a phonetician's rumination by Jayaraju Salivendra and the moderator Lawrence Raj Antony of Hyderabad. We do invite all the participants to join the next week's webinar number 89 on 6th of March at 4:30 p.m. And we thank you once again for having attended this wonderful webinar. And we thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you, Anindya sir, for moderating this session. And thank you.
I'll leave the session now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. The feedback link will be sent to your registered email ID. Thank you.